Jayden Daniels is having one of the greatest rookie seasons by a QB in the NFL, and I don't think it's being talked about enough. When people think about an elite quarterback in the NFC, well, this season it has to be Jayden Daniels. He's been one of, if not the best quarterback in the entire conference, and he's shown how great he is in the playoffs, because in his first ever playoff game, he was able to bring the Commanders their first playoff win since 2005. It's been nearly 20 years since the Commanders have won a playoff game. Hell, they've gone through 3 name changes since the last time they've won a playoff game, and here they are in Jayden Daniels' rookie season, making it to the divisional round. For right now, let's talk about his first game against the Buccaneers in the playoffs. And in this game, not only did Jayden Daniels have the 3rd best QBR in all of Wildcard Weekend, behind only Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, but he was also able to go out and have a 68.6 completion percentage on 268 passing yards. He was absolutely torching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, and he didn't slow down, especially later in the game. But to get things started, the Washington Commanders wouldn't score until the second quarter, and that came off of a Brown 10-yard pass from Jayden Daniels to give the Commanders a 7-3 lead. And the second quarter was all Washington football, because Zane Gonzalez was able to knock in a 52-yard field goal with less than 2 minutes left in the quarter. Of course, the Bucs would go down the field and tie up the game 10-10 heading into halftime, but that didn't mean that was going to slow down any of Washington's momentum, because coming out of the half, Washington was able to tack on another field goal. Zane Gonzalez was amazing this game, and a major reason as to why they were able to upset the Buccaneers. Yes, you heard me, upset the Buccaneers, because by far the Commanders were the underdog in this game. But Jayden Daniels was able to take it to another level in the fourth quarter when the team needed him most. And after about a 2-minute drive and the 10-minute mark in the fourth quarter, he was able to get them into the end zone again with a 5-yard pass to Terry McLaurin to give them a 3-point lead. Of course, the Buccaneers would be able to tie up the game, but that didn't matter, because whenever the Buccaneers scored, Jayden Daniels was able to answer back, and we saw that at the end of regulation, because with 5 minutes left in the game, he was able to run down that game clock. He brought it all the way down to 0, got them in field goal range, and set up Zane Gonzalez for a game-winning kick, one that he barely made, but nonetheless, it still went in. And all of this game was just Jayden Daniels showing to the rest of the NFL how great he was. And that brings us to the second playoff game for the Washington Commanders, where they were set to go up against the number 1 seeded Detroit Lions. And here they go again, pulling off another upset victory. And they did it a bit more convincingly. Now, they did get off to a slow start, because by the end of the first quarter, they only had 3 points on the board. However, the second quarter was all Commander football, because every time Washington touched the ball, they ended up in the end zone. In the second quarter alone, Washington had 4 touchdowns, and by the end of the half, they had a 31-21 lead, a lead in which they wouldn't give up for the rest of the game. And to top it all off, Jayden Daniels led the team down the field 2 times in the fourth quarter. Both resulted in more touchdowns for the Commanders, and that's why they ended up winning 45-31. And I think it's fair to say that nobody saw this coming, because there's a chance that while the Commanders did go 12-5, you weren't really paying attention to them for a majority of the regular season, especially if you're not a fan of an NFC East team, and you probably aren't. I mean, who would be a fan of the Eagles or Cowboys or Giants? But anyway, if you're just now starting to notice Jayden Daniels, well, that's what this performance was. Him putting his name on the map. He will be a top 10 QB by next season, I promise you that. And that's because of the system that Washington was able to implement around him in only his first season. Now, if we take a look at his stats on the year, they shouldn't be surprising, especially if you watch the way he played in the playoffs. Now, in 17 games for the Washington Commanders, he had a 69% completion percentage. Again, about the same as what he did in the playoff game. He threw for 3,568 passing yards and had 25 touchdowns, and kept the interceptions under double digits, because for the season, Jayden Daniels had a total of 9 interceptions. Not too bad, especially for a rookie. those kinds of passing numbers were a big contributor as to why Washington was able to win 12 games, especially when you consider how little they won just a year ago. Now, of course, the front office did make some pretty big acquisitions heading into the year, but before we talk about those big pickups, I also want to mention what Jayden Daniels was able to do on the ground this season, because he is a bit of a dual threat quarterback. If you watched any of his games at LSU, you know that Jayden Daniels is just as lethal on the ground as he is in the air. But anyway, in the season, he had 148 rushing attempts, he ran for 891 rushing yards, and had 6 extra touchdowns on the season from the ground, making his total to about 31 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Not a bad ratio if you ask me, especially considering how young he is. And he did have 5 fumbles, but they weren't too costly for him at the end of the day. These kinds of numbers are why Jayden Daniels was able to go out and be a Pro Bowler in his first season. We'll talk more about his co-stars in a second, but for right now, I just wanted to remind you guys to slow the video down, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 10,000, and every subscription is greatly appreciated. Alright, now let's get to some of these new acquisitions for the Washington Commanders that seem to pay off. And one of the biggest pickups on the offense has to be Austin Ekeler, a running back that was coming over from the LA Chargers. Austin Ekeler was huge for this offense because not only was he a third and short running back, but he was also great out of the backfield when Jayden Daniels needed someone to check it down to. Hell, half of his yards came from receiving yards because that's how much that Jayden Daniels was throwing Austin Ekeler the ball. On the ground, Austin Ekeler had 367 rushing yards, third most on the team behind only Jayden Daniels and of course Brian Robinson. Now those numbers may seem low, and that's because Austin Ekeler was battling injuries the entire season, but in the 12 games that he played and in the 6 that he started, 367 on the ground isn't bad. He also added an extra 366 in the air because, like I said, he was a bit of a receiving back for the Commanders. That's just kind of how they used him. And he was also able to get 4 touchdowns on the season, which means that it was a pretty good year for Austin Ekeler, all things considered. But he wasn't the only big acquisition this team made on the offensive side of the ball during free agency, because 2 out of the top 3 players who lead the team in receiving yards are also free agent acquisitions, with number 2 being a 34-year-old Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz has had a phenomenal season because it seems as though Jayden Daniels loves to throw this man the ball. He had 66 receptions on 91 targets, second most on the team behind only Terry McLaurin, had 653 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. And when you consider that third place had 3 touchdowns, well, this guy was getting plenty of red zone targets. Zach Ertz was great alongside Jayden Daniels, and I feel as though Jayden Daniels wouldn't have had the season that he did if Zach Ertz wasn't signed to the team. Now, another big signing was at the wide receiver position because the Commanders went out and got Olamide Zaccheaus. Now, Zaccheaus hadn't really found a stable home. Sure, he had spent his first few seasons with the Atlanta Falcons, but after only 1 year in Philadelphia, he ended up signing with the Washington Commanders, and that's one of the best moves he could have made in his career because he is clearly the number 2 wideout behind Terry McLaurin. He had 506 receiving yards, again he had 3 touchdowns, and he did all of this while only having 64 targets. It helps when you catch a majority of your targets because he ended up having 45 receptions out of the 64 targets. So anytime that Jayden Daniels was throwing Zaccheaus the ball, there was a high chance that Zaccheaus was going to catch it. And that's a major reason as to why he was top 3 on this offense when it came to being a receiver. But it's not just the new acquisitions that were great. It's also the players that have been here for a while, because as I was alluding to earlier, Terry McLaurin has had himself one hell of a year. He's led the team in just about every major receiving category. He has 1,000 receiving yards, he had 82 receptions, 13 touchdowns, he was a Pro Bowler and made the All-Pro second team. He deserves every award that he's gotten this season because Terry McLaurin has been great. Him and Jayden Daniels are a fantastic duo, and it feels as though after being in the NFL for years, Terry McLaurin finally has a real quarterback that can get him the ball. because for a long time now, Terry McLaurin has had just about a new quarterback every other season. In fact, he's had several quarterbacks for every year that he's been in the NFL because the Washington Commanders can never seem to get that position right. Up until the draft, in which they selected Jayden Daniels, who I think is a great pick. There's a reason he's a Heisman winner, because Jayden Daniels was ready to take over the NFL. Now, I think I've covered every major offensive piece for the Commanders besides their lead running back, Brian Robinson Jr., who went out and had 799 rushing yards so far and has had 8 touchdowns in the 13 games that he's played. And if you know Brian Robinson's story, this kind of season is very impressive. He got shot at, came back from being shot multiple times, and now you see him being the lead running back on a team who's winning playoff games. But of course, they're not winning playoff games solely because of the offense. The defense has played a major role. Hell, new signing Bobby Wagner is the leader of the Washington Commanders defense and has been a key and integral part to most of their success. We saw the role that Bobby Wagner played in the playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's been doing that kind of stuff the entire season. So it doesn't surprise me when this Commanders team is having one of the best defensive seasons that they've had in a long time, because they made the right signings when it mattered. It wasn't only Bobby Wagner who came in free agency for this team. They were also able to get a great safety in Jeremy Chin from the Carolina Panthers, and it just kind of keeps going. Every move that the Washington Commanders made in free agency seemed to work out for them. Their backup quarterback, Marcus Mariota, was great when Jayden Daniels didn't play, and all they need to do now is get past the Detroit Lions. And if they're able to beat the Detroit Lions in the next few days, some way, somehow, then you can't count them out as Super Bowl favorites. They took down the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won their division, and they were able to beat the most dominant team in the NFC for the majority of the season. The fact that they were able to beat the Lions means that the future is very bright for the Commanders for the rest of their playoff run. So Jayden Daniels' rookie season isn't finished being written yet. Who knows how his story will end, but what I'm telling you right now is that he's off to a great start. But anyway, that's about it for this video. I think I've covered everything Commander football wise, so we're gonna call it here. Catch y'all later. Much love.